People find community in all sorts of places. People find it on sports teams. People find it in the workplace. They find it in their school, their fraternities and sororities. Interestingly enough, the church is supposed to be a community, and that's not really our experience of the church. And even if we do experience community, it's like, well, yeah, my parish, we have coffee and donuts every Sunday, or we have these big fish fry. But I think in terms of this actual community that's fulfilling, people don't often find that in the church. And so I do think as a church, maybe not every place, but at least what I'm aware of in the United States, in the Midwest, I think we are kind of dropping the ball when it comes to community. People long to be part of something. They want to be part of community. And again, I don't mean that in just some sort of flippant sense or just a gathering of large people. And so it's interesting that so many other places that really don't have the fullness of truth, they don't provide the fullness of meaning. Again, whether it's a sports team or something else, don't really fully provide that greatest sense of belonging. And yet people are so often looking at for other places. And so wherever people are seeking a counterfeit, it's because the church is failing to provide the authentic version of that. When it comes to people seeking after fortune tellers and palm reading and things like that, it's because we as a church, we're failing to share God's voice with people. We're not offering them like the gift of prophecy. And so I think when people are looking for these less authentic forms of community and belonging, it's really because they're not finding it in the church. So super pumped to be here with you today, talking about this in the normal Christian life. And we're here with a very good friend of mine, one of my best friends. I'm surprised it's taken us this long to get you on here, Paul. But Father Paul Gardner, so he's a priest in the Diocese of Bismarck. So we went to seminary together. So yeah, just opening up, community, belonging, evangelizing, helping people to belong, creating a system for evangelization. I don't know if you guys have anything you want to talk about in terms of introduction.
I think that's a great introduction. Father, it's good to be on here with you guys. I've been looking forward to this for a long time. And it's great that you begin with community because that's how, we got to be friends from halfway across the country. Seminary life, as you know, it provides this like really exceptional model of community that most people have no idea is even possible. Where you just like bunch of men who have like strong goodwill, desire for community, like are all put in the same place. And in the midst of that, we forged a really awesome friendship, and then through you to Father Chris. So I'm pumped to be on with this because this is how our friendship began, and we see the value of community really, really clearly. Even what 3 years later, since I was ordained, and you a couple years before that. Years later, halfway across the country, we're still close. And it's the testament to the power of like when community life in the church is done really well, it has a really transformative and lasting effect. So pumped to be able to talk about it with you.
Yeah, what comes to my mind as we're opening up this conversation is a joke I heard a few years ago that it was like a meme on the internet, and somebody said, nobody ever talks about Jesus's greatest miracle, which was having 11 close friends in his 30s. So I know I've experienced that. I think, like you said, Paul, I totally agree that we're really spoiled in seminary with like not just an amazing community that's centered around the gospel, around the faith, around the sacraments and mass, and this really intentional community of men living together. But also we're spoiled in the sense that it's just kind of given to you and it's just around the corner. You can walk down the hall and run into like 10 other amazing guys, especially like I think for men, once you get into your 20s and 30s. But for everybody, there's a breakdown. A lot of the institutions that provide that community, that provide easy access to people your age with shared interests, that oftentimes happens through school, of course. I think also, this is something maybe we might get into. I don't want to kind of pull us all the way into this topic right now, but something I've been reflecting on the last couple of years based on the work of Dr. Mary Eberstadt. She talks about how the family was like the institution to help sustain faith and to help sustain the community. And for a lot of people, the way they live family life has changed a lot in the last several decades. So many people will spend 8, 10, 12 years living on their own after being part of a family before they start their own family if they decide to do that. So there's just a lot of things working against the kind of normal course of community and how that develops. People don't just go from being part of their own family to to starting a new family, they oftentimes spend a lot of time in these other kind of new forms of living life, a little more isolated, a little more kind of picking and choosing who you're going to hang out with. And it's not always so clear where that community's going to be sustained and where it's going to thrive. So I think the church absolutely should be a central part of that. And I'm excited to hear more about your guys' ideas as we get into this.
I don't want to sound too cynical, but when it comes to sports teams and things like that, there's really a pretty high level of commitment. So whether it's like an athlete actually on a team, it's one thing if someone's an NFL player and that's like their job and they make like a lot of money. But even like high school football, I remember being a chaplain and you had to practice sometimes for 3 hours every day. And just like a lot of hard work. And high schoolers are already pretty busy. I mean, they're at school for a full day and it's like, man, why are you so dedicated for this game? And no one's going to care in 1 year, 5 years, 10 years about who won sectionals this particular year. And so there's a real high level of investment that's pretty impressive. So that's people who are on the team. But even apart from those on the team, it's just interesting to see how invested people are who aren't even on a team, like just a fan. So yeah, whether it's baseball or football, whatever sport it is, well, let's say it's baseball. So around here, there's a lot of Cubs and Cardinals fans. But, people spend a lot of time. People spend a lot of money, like going to see the games, going to watch the games. I know for myself, one of the most valuable resources is time. And so people are spending a lot of time talking about this, watching replays, reading statistics, not even just the games themselves. It could be the draft. There's different levels of investment. And so when it comes to like, well, why aren't people more involved with church? Or why aren't people more committed? Or why aren't people more generous? It's like, well, maybe people just don't want to make sacrifices. But we see, especially for people on the team, but even not on a team, that there's this real level of commitment and investment. And I don't know about you guys, Paul and Chris, if you've come across this from Jordan Peterson, but he talks about just young men being involved in gangs and things like that. And his point is not so much like, are you going to be in gang or not be in a gang, but what gang are you going to be a part of? And so he's using the word gang loosely, of course, because he's saying we just have this desire to belong. We have this desire to be part of this family. And so when it comes to young men involved in gangs, it's not just like, hey, don't be in gangs, those are bad. It's filling some sort of need that they have. And so one that needs to help us step up and provide that community. But even apart from that, it's interesting to know like what the human person is capable of when they actually feel like they belong to something. And it's not really sports teams. It's not really that noble on the deepest level. It is just a game. I'm gonna stick to that. But with the gang, certainly it's wrong. But like people risking their lives, making dramatic sacrifices to be part of this game, and so that's just a very interesting phenomenon that should make us pause and think. Like, what are people longing for, and what are people capable of?
I have this distinctive memory of going to a Monday Night Football game at Lambeau Field in Green Bay, probably like 10, 15 years ago. I don't remember exactly. But it was like the biggest game I could imagine. I'm a big Packers fan. And it was against the Vikings. So big divisional rivalry. And the Packers destroyed the Vikings that night. Sorry, Vikings fans. But I have this really distinct memory of being at the game, sitting in like a section where I could run up and down the aisle. Uh, and it was like the Packers scored the first time. Like I had so many best friends in an instant. I couldn't even believe it. I just remember like running down the aisle, just like hugging people, like drunk guys, and like everybody's like throwing popcorn at each other. We were so we had like the best community that you could dream of in a sense, right? In like almost an instantaneous manner because we were all like wearing the same jersey. And I remember after the game, like walking through the streets of Green Bay and just like high fiving like random people in the streets. And it's like, holy smokes, the power of like coming to something that's like ritualized and formulated in a very like programmatic way and something that we're like we're all in this together, we're celebrating together. If we have lost, we lose together. And like these are people that don't even live in the same state as. And I was like, ready to be best friends with any of them. So I think you're right getting into the topic of like the culture has tapped into something, whether it's something like the sports world or whether there's something like gangs. We do have this strong sense of like there are community opportunities to be found, even though it can be like, yeah, something that's not that deep, but it's like it still like really touches at something really deep inside the human person. And even though like being a Packers fan wasn't like my deepest identity even then, like I felt that at the core of my being. And it's like, well, okay, so how do you translate that? How do you make that into something we can learn from in the Christian life?
I want to be careful using this analogy or this word, but whenever you're talking about the kind of ecstasy and the kind of excitement, and I even remember that like at going to high school basketball games and just like having this sort of obvious, identity with my school and just kind of that's my team in a sense, and just that kind of emotion and that excitement that comes over you. But the word that comes to mind is worship. And I don't, and I'm not saying at all that people who are excited about a sports game or who are cheering or really pumped up are worshiping the players or they're worshiping the game in like a literal. So I'm not saying they're all guilty of idolatry.
Sometimes I wonder if they are, but
Sometimes I think it verges on that. I think it can certainly become. I think it certainly is an idol for a lot of people. But even just the sense of worship and the sense of like we're all directing our attention to the same thing. We're all enthusiastic about that thing. We're all excited about that thing. And there's a shared experience of delight and joy. For some of my studies, I was reading a lot about empathy and like how that works. And there's something that just enriches every human experience when it's a shared experience. When I am feeling a certain thing and I know that you're also feeling it and I know that he and she, they're also feeling it, it kind of multiplies and it makes it into a bigger experience than ever could be just by yourself. And you kind of get that instinct as well whenever you've experienced something really awesome, or like a movie, you thought it was like the best movie you've ever seen, where there's an instinct to tell other people about it. Because we recognize, we have this impulse that this would be better if it were shared. Like if more people shared the experience, it would give me a greater joy. And I already am going to jump in a little bit here with St. Paul's image of the body of Christ. And he says where one member rejoices, all the members rejoice. And there's certain goods in life, there's certain joys, there's certain experiences that can only be shared, that can only be really fully enjoyed for what they are if they're shared. And I think we'll probably have more parallels about this, but again, with the analogy or the image of worship, I think there's a connection to the liturgy there. And so my instinct right off the bat is to say, if we're not experiencing that kind of community in the church, well, if the central thing, like you experienced, Paul, if the central thing that creates that bond and that shared excitement and that shared experience is the action, is the performance, is the thing that we're all gathered around and that we're all celebrating, then maybe there's something seriously deficient in the way we're worshiping and the way that central ritualized action is being presented to us. There's always going to be some people who are really excited about it, but if people by and large are not engaged in it, if it's not exciting, if it's not compelling, then it's not going to be much of a shared experience. It's a shared experience, but it might be a little bit of a disappointing experience. And so it might just be a matter of degree where like it's just not reaching a certain critical level of intensity or excitement. And, I know we had an episode of the Mass a while back. Oh, we're probably not going to spend a lot of time talking about the Mass and the liturgy, but yeah, if that's not exciting, but it really is what we believe it to be, then it must be that there's something missing, something lacking that's making an inadequate experience, and it's not serving as the unifying, bonding experience that it should be.
Just to challenge just the common culture, I mean, obviously, I don't think gangs are that. I don't think gangs are important or moral. But even when it comes to the sports, like I would challenge just these other places we try to find community and challenge us just to reflect, like, okay, why does this actually matter in 5 years, again, 50 years, 200 years, 300 years? Does it really matter who won the Olympics? Does it really matter who won the Super Bowl? Does it really matter who won the junior high state volleyball tournament? And so, I would just like to challenge our idols that we can try to find joy and satisfaction and just things that don't really provide for it. There are good aspects to it, so not everything about sports is evil. That being said, so there's our part of like, okay, am I trying to find authentic community and fulfillment in something that's actually satisfying, like God, the kingdom of God, the church? That being said, we're priests here, and I will say that we as a church are dropping the ball a lot, and there's more that we can do to make the experience of the church better, whether it's the priests or the lay people. Young people can sometimes think, man, mass is kind of lame. Mass is kind of boring. And in some sense, I agree with you. A lot of times mass is pretty lame. A lot of times mass is pretty boring. On an objective theological level, mass is amazing. Like the grace and blessings and love that God pours out, the connection that he offers us to him, it is amazing. That being said, just like sometimes the engagement of it, sometimes like how much we're participating could be our participation with the music, the type of music that's being used. Yes, I know a lot of times priests cannot be very engaging. I know sometimes priests can have lame preaching, not very prayerful masses. And so, yeah, there is some sense that mass can be lame, at least experientially. I think on a fundamental level, it's not. But I want to acknowledge, like, if it feels kind of boring or not that engaging, I kind of agree with you. But that being said, there's so many different experiences of mass or just the Catholic faith that people don't always experience. So one, I remember even in the same day experiencing two completely different masses. So one, it was a summer morning, it was a summer mass on a Sunday, and I don't know, people were extra tired or extra people were gone, but like, just people were not participating. And I went to mass. I'm like, I feel like kind of uninspired. And then mass that same night, I went to a Damascus Catholic youth summer camp, and there's all these college missionaries, and they're like super excited, and they all wanted to be there. And the kids were participating because the cool college kids were participating. I mean, this is the same mass, the same readings, the same prayers from this morning, and a completely different experience. It was like, man, this is amazing. I just as an encouragement of what's possible. But yeah, this isn't all about the mass, but like, can we do our part? I mean, one is priest. Yes, priest, we got to not drop the ball, but then also just other Catholics. Can we do something to increase the experience of beauty, provide a good experience of faith, and as we've been saying over and over, provide a good and authentic sense of community?
So it's interesting that you talk about the excitement level and how the culture provides certain like functions, whether it's sports or whatever it may be, that's provides like a strong sense of excitement. And I think we all would like be pretty well agreed that the answer to this is not like we have to make mass more exciting. If I can use my going to a football game example, what really was compelling to me wasn't actually so much the excitement that came from it, but the fact that I felt an identity with the other people who were there, and that excitement just so happened to be the medium for that community identity. And I think it's actually the identity that was most compelling to me. Like I am a Packers fan, and I belong. I'm with somebody. And so I think that's really the thing to be abstracted from all this is like, okay, maybe at the deeper level, what I'm longing for is identity. And so you go back to the mass then and say like, okay, what is it that people should be finding there? Okay, there's an identity with the Lord and with my brothers and sisters who are there. How do you form identity? That's a rich question. If we can go back to Peterson, you mentioned Peterson earlier. One of the insights I've kind of gained from his discourse on identity was talking about the reality that identity comes from a rather like mysterious collage of experiences that a person will have, and particularly with other people. And so you could have like a joy, like a joke with somebody, right? If you want to like feel like you're associated with somebody, like have a good laugh with them, and you're gonna actually feel close with that person. Um, Today, I was actually talking to a friend of mine who was driving with somebody else that she didn't know very well, and she got a flat tire, and they had to like go through the process of changing the tire together. And like later, they're like, yeah, well, like I felt like we were better friends. This reality that a flat tire was the medium for actually, if we can call it a sense of community and identity. So, okay, so what goes into identity? Laughter, shared experiences of like laughing people, shared experiences of suffering with them, shared experiences of like moving in the same direction, like on a mission. We share an objective together. um we could talk about just like the passing of time, where you're like in the presence of somebody. The passing of time creates a sense of identity. Personal investment, like if I am in any sort of group environment and I spend money on it and they also spend money on it. Think about the NFL, like how much money you spend to go to an NFL game. It's ridiculous. It is absolutely insane. And yet we, like every one of us that sits inside of a, would it be an NBA stadium or MLB stadium, whatever it may be, we have all spent an insane amount of money to be at that same game. And you don't think that that forms identity? You're lying to yourself, right? That amount of money that we spend like makes us be like, and we're in this, and like we're here with each other. So it's a little bit hard to like pin down like what gives a person a sense of identity, but I think it's a broad collage of things that come together over the passing of time, and is very, very powerful. And I think in the church it can be done intentionally. Like we have all the opportunities to suffer together, to laugh together, to invest money together. It's called the collection at mass, right? Those things aren't just done so that like the church can be wealthy. Those things are done so that a person can actually feel like they belong there. They can say, "This is my home." If I don't put money in the collection basket, I actually don't feel like I'm at home. I feel like I feel like I might as well be in like I don't know, the mall. You can walk around the mall and not spend any money, and it's just gonna be the mall.
We started off with the example of a shared experience of joy and excitement, like you said, Paul, and you had your experience at the Packers game. I think it'd be fair to say that the experience of shared joy and excitement, while there is a very profound, the most profound reason for shared experience of joy at Mass, that it doesn't happen at the sort of superficial level where it's so readily experienced by people. And the ability to enter into the joy of what's happening at the Mass and the ability to experience unity with the other people through that shared joy is something that really requires some formation and requires just some deepening of like your ability to experience joy. It's not just, I don't want to say it's not beginner friendly, but it takes a little bit of patience to learn how to enjoy. I mean, even just to have the interior stillness and the interior silence, the kind of contemplative posture of the heart that's able to experience the Word of God with an excitement. It is exciting. Like the Word of God, the message of salvation is literally the good news. It's the good news that every single person was made for, but it takes a little bit of work. And I think maybe we just kind of insist oftentimes theologically, like what you said, Michael, that's all objectively true, theologically true, that this is on paper, and we believe, we profess it in the creed, that this is the greatest news, that objectively it is like the best foundation for community, the best motive for being excited, for belonging. And yet we kind of keep insisting on that, and we don't maybe respect or fully appreciate how the other sources of community are meant to be powerful on-ramps and that they're necessary for us as human beings. So I think of this with the Eucharistic revival that the church has had in recent years. So oftentimes people point to the Pew Research survey and like, oh, only 30-some% of people who identify as Catholic believe that Jesus is really present in the Eucharist. And for some people, the response to that was just to keep hammering over and over and over on like the doctrine and like the teaching of transubstantiation and Jesus' real presence. I'm not saying that shouldn't be a part of it. I think it is a key part of revival and just making sure we have clarity about what we believe. But I think so much of why some people don't believe that, or why they're not present at Mass and present for the preaching in a way that maybe they could be more deeply convinced of that, is that those other pieces of community that would make them more invested are lacking. So there is a theological misunderstanding or a lack of belief there, but that doesn't mean that the path to restoring that is just a head-on theological approach of preaching the point and doubling down on that point. I think that would be kind of easier in a way, It's like an evangelization. We've talked in the past about how, for Michael and I, especially, like being in love with apologetics, you kind of wish that people would just like come at you with a bunch of questions and be like, "Oh, I don't agree with this point. I don't agree with this doctrine," and so you could just answer them with your ready-made textbook answer. But the truth is, oftentimes people's relationship to God and people's relationship with the church is a lot more nuanced and it's a lot more complicated. And the reasons why people are not convinced of the truth of the gospel or of the church is oftentimes a more complicated story that involves, you have to get into that with relationship. You have to hear their story. You have to invest yourself. And so as we talk about evangelization and community, I think that's just a key point, is that the markers or like the metrics that we use for people not participating, just trying to address those head on, oftentimes I don't think is very effective. And we have to take kind of the longer human route of like, okay, where's the breakdown really here? Is it really a breakdown in teaching? I think in recent decades, past couple decades, we've had pretty awesome teaching as far as like orthodoxy, and there's been so many amazing resources. We talk about that a lot. More resources than ever to learn about your faith. But the community aspect is where I think where we're really dropping the ball, like you said, Michael.
I did want to mention some other examples just because we've talked about sports a lot, and I mentioned gangs a couple of times, but just to give you a broad perspective in case you're not interested in gangs or sports that much, another good example of this is definitely concerts. I used to go to a lot of music concerts. Another example of this would be politics. So politics is not just about, I think this particular party has the right solution on these things. That is part of it, but it becomes this whole thing of us versus them, and I'm part of the good guys, and these are the bad guys. We're the ones making things better. The other party's making things worse. A lot of these gender ideology stuff is just another attempt at looking for like community and identity. I mean, even with the LGBTQ thing, it's like, why is there so many flags about this and parades and things like that? Like, why is a sexual preference or orientation, like, why does that become so defining to you? And so with all these examples, and I can connect or relate to the concert thing, because just it was almost like worship, and it's like a shadow and a snapshot of what does it mean to be of one heart and one mind with other people. And so for Catholics, like, and for a lot of Christians, I would say having the same belief is really important. And when someone believes what you believe, that's gives you a great sense of unity. And so when there are these like lyrics and songs that are really meaningful to you, and everyone else is excited, it makes us want to be part of that. It adds to the experience. And yeah, like Paul, you were saying that we're not just talking about making the mass more entertaining. It's not just like add a bunch of flashing lights and fog machines and, I don't know, have the priest do cartwheels during his homily. It's not just about making it the mass more stimulating, but it's about getting people engaged. And that's why it's mass is sometimes not that exciting and engaging, and other experiences are, is because when you go to a game or you go to a concert, everyone wants to be there. Everyone's excited. And can you imagine being at a concert where there's 50,000 people and only 5,000 people actually want to be there? I promise you it would not be near as exciting. And so a lot of this is just about engagement. So I think it's important that you brought up, Paul, just the importance of being like financially invested and invested with more of one's self. So the impetus for this conversation was actually that Paul and I talk about evangelization a lot. What's effective, what's not effective, what's the big picture for it. And I'm someone who's really excited about these like one-off encounters, whether it's praying for someone for healing, whether it's like a really engaging conversation, sharing like a word of prophecy with someone. I like the idea of really demonstrating the gospel with power, as St. Paul talks about. That being said, evangelization won't be complete if it's just these one-off encounters, people praying with cashiers, people talking to their waitress about Jesus. It has to become more of a system. And so I think, if I remember a conversation, Paul, from before, is that we were talking about how we need things to kind of feed into a system so that if people are really touched by God, whether it's a conversation or more of a encounter with the Holy Spirit, we need to bring them into something. And in fact, when I was actually thinking about becoming a priest in college, I was really excited about evangelization, but I was like, I kind of don't want to. I don't want to invite people to church because when they get there, it's going to be not really that exciting. And for me, it's like, okay, I love the truth of it, but like in terms of what I'm inviting people to, and so what is it that we're inviting people back to? Can we engage them in a way that's not just, as Chris, you were saying, just telling them the truth or knowing the theology well? Like, just repeating what you said, Chris, but we have so many resources, we have so many teachings available, we have so many books and videos, and that's not enough. And so we have to be providing something more than just the intellectual knowledge.
Yeah, Father Michael, I've always appreciated how you are so bold in evangelizing in, especially like environments that are, I don't know, for most of us, kind of uncomfortable to maybe start up a conversation with a stranger. These encounters, maybe just in regular society, that take some boldness to enter into. And I think those are absolutely invaluable. You know, they're essential to the Christian life. We can never get away from recognizing the importance of encountering people and leading them to Jesus, perhaps for the first time. I do think, as you said, it also leads to a formalized evangelization, which is also necessary. There's a formal element to it as well, and that'd be the world that I'm a little more familiar with. I'm assigned here in Bismarck as a chaplain of a middle school. I don't know if there's another middle school chaplain in the country, but it's actually quite an amazing experience because I get a chance to be with middle school students, and it's a very, very influential age. They are very kind of wild and crazy. You know, middle school is a tough time, but it's precisely because of that that I kind of have access to seeing their hearts a little bit more clearly in a place where they're really open to receiving the truths of the gospel in ways that are appropriate to them at their age. And what's really fascinating about the school environment that I work in is that I know that each day, I have mass and I have the offering the sacraments. And for the most part, those things just seem sort of routine and normal. And maybe if the kids go to them voluntarily, it's because mom and dad told them to. And so you don't necessarily see the big, heart moving transformational moments happening every time mass happens by any means. But what I do see is that Jesus does move in the hearts of young people at the middle school age. And having the institution in place gives me the opportunity as a priest and as a teacher to be attentive to the moments when they are going to encounter Jesus, but they don't know it. They have a movement in religion class or even in the science lab of wonder. And maybe it's something personal in their life, right? I have a lot of students who come from troubled families or they come from difficult backgrounds, or maybe this is something as seemingly ridiculous or small as like a middle school breakup. These human things that happen constantly in this environment, I can tend to, and I can watch how Jesus gets his way and how Jesus offers graces to the students, but they don't experience they experience it, but they don't realize, they don't name it for what it is. But if I can be attentive to that, I can be there and have that conversation with them and point it out to them. And they can be like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that God was having his hand in this. And so the institutional element allows a space for the encounter to happen in God's own time and for that to be tended to. I'm just constantly amazed at the graces that come to my dear students because of this environment that we have. Likewise, at the parish that I'm at, we just started a youth group about a year and a half ago. And I had experienced a lot of youth groups, some better than others. Sometimes kind of feeling the awkwardness of the youth group environment. We all recognize the need for things like vulnerability and prayer, and it's hard sometimes to initiate those sort of things without it being forced and without it being something that just kind of feels like tense. But something that I feel like is very much God led in our parish that has made our youth group to be a very sort of fruitful experience for many students is that when we began it, we actually didn't start with students at all. We started with a group of young adults. I found 5 young adults in the parish that I knew were like just great people that to be honest, I just like liked being around them. They were just fun people. And that was the criteria. They have to be fun. And I invited them over to the rectory along with my pastor, and we just like made as nice of a dinner as we could for them. And it was just great. We just had a conversation. It was hardly about youth group. And we just said, hey, you guys are all fun people. We want to get to know you better. We want to invite you to be friends. And so it was awkward at first for a lot of them. I knew all of them, but they didn't know each other. And so we kind of had to like suffer through the awkwardness of that a little bit. But then we told each one of them to go invite another friend that they had to come back for another dinner a couple weeks later. And so they did that. And so we ended up having close to a dozen people around our dinner table. And again, a little bit of awkwardness, people getting used to each other. But we kind of began to float the idea of a youth group and like, what could that look like? But in the midst of all this, in the midst of just discussing it with these young adults, we just started to really enjoy being around each other. And they started actually inviting each other over to their own homes for like board games. We'd get invited out, go to hang out and have a couple drinks maybe. And it was just fun. We just enjoyed being around each other, and like real friendships ensued. And eventually got to the point of saying, okay, what if we let high school students come and hang out with us while we're hanging out with each other? And that's the idea of the youth group. We're not going to try and minister to them. We're going to hang out at the church in the gym, and we enjoy hanging with each other. And if anybody else comes, great, they're welcome to come. But if not, like, we just like hanging out with each other anyways. It's been amazingly fruitful. And kids come and they want to hang out. They like to play basketball. We've introduced Eucharistic adoration, confession, small groups. But all those things flow from just a really genuine, no, we're friends with each other. Do you want to be friends too? You're welcome, but we don't need you.
That's a really awesome setup. It just sounds attractive. Like as you're describing, I'm like, I want to be part of this group. It's beautiful. Something that came up in my mind as you were speaking was this classic formulation that we've shared a couple times on the show of RIM, R-I-M, and this is used a lot in seminary formation to talk about our relationship with God, and then so relationship, identity, mission. And it just occurred to me as you're speaking that when it comes to, I think really kind of any ministry or any kind of group of people within the church, sometimes there's this tendency to skip relationship and try to get right into like mission. So a lot of people in the church, especially people you actually do want to have on your team, like your core team, like you talked about, a lot of people are turned off by it because I think they feel kind of used, because it's like, oh, you're a pretty normal young person. We need you to do X, Y, and Z. And there's not any sense that like I really belong, or like people like having me around at all. Like I could just as well never talk to you as long as you can show up and and minister to the high school kids. Another question that, or point that rose up in my heart as you're speaking was like, what's it all for? What is this all about? The goal of the church, the whole mission of the church, is aimed at communion, like unity, friendship with God, union with God, and union with one another. So if that's the ultimate goal, we're not going to reach it by just trying to skip over intimacy and skip over friendship. And it can kind of feel like maybe sometimes we're trying to short circuit the human work and the messiness and the awkwardness, like you said. But I also thought of, as you're describing, having this, at one point it was 12 people roughly. I just thought, like, well, that's just the model of Jesus, right? And this is what the Focus Apostolate does as well, is they focus on building friendships and building relationships, discipling people like Jesus did and gathering them around. And it's not just like this utilitarian, like means to an end. Like you said, it's not just like, oh, I'll lure them in with a nice dinner and then I'll become friends with them. And then suddenly I'll throw a contract at them to be part of my thing. And like, it was all worth it because I got them to serve the parish. It's actually enjoyable. And it's okay. Like if ministry is enjoyable, it's okay if sharing the gospel is human and is fun and involves like just a lot of time hanging out. Sometimes, again, I think it's just the trying to jump straight to how can we get more people in the youth group? It's like we get all kinds of weird, and we get very unhuman in the way we approach. Like it should be very human in the best sense of the word, I think.
This is maybe a premature, undeveloped thought, but I do think that the virtue of generosity has a lot to do with the initiation of that of genuine relationships. And I'm so glad you brought up Rim, because that's exactly the model that I've just always found to be so fruitful, right? Relationship, identity, mission, which, ironically fits really well with what Jesus says, remain in me, relationship with Jesus, right? Remaining in him is what makes like the vine produce fruit, right? Which is the missional side of the church, right? So that's just kind of fun. But the virtue of generosity, I think, is what is so key to the beginning, especially something that the priest can do, which is to, like, you can't love everybody in your parish, like, attentively, in a very specified way. But if you can find some that would be particularly receptive, to be able to just say, I'm just gonna go a little bit extra. I'm just gonna open up, and it's fun. It's enjoyable. That's like you were saying, it's actually just really enjoyable. It's life giving for the priest, and to be able to say, "Hey, welcome to my home. Like, I just want to invest in you, and I know that if this isn't the whole parish right in front of me, but I know that this is going to be fruitful, and it's going to be through the vine, right? It's going to be through the vine." So that's the model, and you're right. It's nothing new, and use the word lure. We're not just trying to lure you in with the meal, but you know, then again, Jesus did also lure them in with a meal, right? There's a reason why it's not like the last discussion; it's the last supper. It's not just the last class. It's the last supper, right? And something as human as dinner is precisely the place where authentic friendship is formed, and it's a showing to people, like you were saying, Father, that it's not we're not here to use you for youth group. We're not here to use you for our parish, uh, whatever we're trying to get done. I care about you, and people feel that, and then that creates within them a desire to imitate generosity.
St. Paul in 1 Corinthians 12, he's talking about the different spiritual gifts, healing, prophecy, ministration. And in 1 Corinthians 13, he then clarifies that there are these different things like faith, prophecy, you can move mountains, all of that, because if you don't have love, it's useless. And so we know that love is important, but like, what's the role of love in evangelization? And it is just like some sense, like just being loving and affectionate to the person you come across, but love should be like this sustained, lived out in this like sustained form of community, not just like, well, when I happen to see you at church, I'm just going to smile extra big and be extra nice and listen extra well for this like conversation and coffee and donuts. And so love is attractive, but it's not just, again, this warm, smiley feeling. It's like a real sense of investment. It's a real sense of a belonging and sharing of life together. Jesus, when he was sharing the gospel, he had these instances where he was preaching and healing lots of people. And so a lot of people tend to ignore the fact that there was crowds sometimes, there was miracles. And so that's incomplete when that's not there. But we've spent a lot of time talking about that in this podcast. But then the other half is, okay, is there the friendship that's part of it? And something we don't see necessarily we see references, but it's not taking up a lot of actual words, was just the friendship and the community of the early church. We know that they gathered together, they held everything in common. And it's not some sort of biblical mandate for communism. It was just this natural side effect of living in friendship and being part of a community. I find that like really attractive, and I think it's something worth reflecting on, because again, myself, I can be focused on the individual encounter, but what am I inviting people into? Because I, as a priest, I do have to have relationships and friendships, maybe in a way that you were talking about, Paul, but then also realizing that like I can try to lead people to Christ, but I can't myself just be everyone's personal friend. And so there needs to be this greater like participation of the community. And when people leave the Catholic Church for another Christian church, or people just are Christian, they leave the Christian church. Sometimes it's because they just don't feel connected to people at the church. I do wish people were more just committed to the truth and principles and, I don't know, keeping Sabbath holy, being part of a believing community, worshiping God. I do wish people were that way, but as human beings, we're weak and we need other people. And if you think historically speaking, how hard it'd be to survive just on your own before like the towns and markets and jobs and money. Like if you're just out in the wilderness, how hard would it be to live on your own? Some really hardcore people can do it. They can make the fire. They could hunt the animals, all that stuff, find the clean water. But like, it'd be really hard to survive in the physical wilderness on your own. And so the analogy is like the spiritual wilderness, I don't know, or just like the spiritual life. Maybe some people can kind of do it on their own. But to really thrive as a human person, we really need that community. And just to say it clearly and echo what you guys are saying, it's just attractive. One last little story comes to mind for me at the moment was, I think it was one of the greatest times of joy that I'd felt when, and I don't know if you were there, Paul, or not, but it was in Effingham, and we were at the Panera Bread after doing some ministry with high school students, and we were just like laughing and joking and just enjoying friendship. And it was like this joy was radiant. It was like contagious. I mean, it was tangible. It was felt. And you could tell people were really drawn. Like the waitress was kind of lingering around. She was wanting to talk to us. People were looking over, but it wasn't in that kind of like annoyed way. I could tell there was some sort of attraction to that. And so, yeah, that's what people are longing for. Like seeing like that joy, and like I want to be part of that.
So something else that's come to my mind in this conversation is that Father Paul here is a priest of the Diocese of Bismarck, and we've made a lot of references to the book From Christendom to Apostolic Mission, which is published by University of Mary in Bismarck. And so we often bring this up on the show, how in the church today, many people are saying that we're experiencing this shift from Christendom, which is a culture in which the life of the church, the sacraments, the institutional church permeates the culture, and that it really kind of sustains and serves to transmit the faith to the next generation. Transitioning from that kind of culture, that kind of society, to one that is more similar to the apostolic time, when we're meeting a lot of unbelief when we go out to share the gospel. But something that, as we were speaking, occurred to me is when we think about going from Christendom, from this more institutionalized, solid form of Christianity where the faith is transmitted, to apostolic age, is that the apostles had a very strong, robust sense of community. So we shouldn't think about, to the extent that this is true, from Christendom to apostolic mission, we shouldn't think that that means from community and from the institutional church to kind of going off on our own and just having all these one-on-one encounters or these little tiny small groups. It would be really foolish to, just because we have this sense of like, wow, there's a lot of unbelief today, to ignore the audience that we have in our own pews. And like you said, Paul, in your school, in your experience, I've experienced that so much in schools myself too. It's like how much need and opportunity there is for evangelization with people who are already coming to us for different reasons, for education, for the sacraments and things. So just wanted to point that out, that like when we're talking about some of the other apostolic qualities, like Michael said, with like the gifts, the Holy Spirit, the empowered evangelization, the going out more to the margins and things, that shouldn't make us think that we don't need to renew the structures. Like the church is always going to be a structure. There's always going to be an institutional component. And for most people, the faith is supposed to be transmitted through family and through the institution of the church. No matter how much we empower the church, no matter how much we equip people, no matter how gifted we are, we're not going to be able to all go out and individually evangelize and pray for every single person out there who needs faith. We do need to have a more established system of like just transmitting the faith in these simple human ways through these institutions. We're not anti-institution, especially not in the Catholic Church. Just wanted to mention that.
I think that's a great connection. And I'm glad you put it the way you did, that the maybe more extraordinary encounters that you have with people out in society, wherever it may be, grocery store, coffee shop, that those things lead to something that is institutional. You know, a good question I was asked is like, to what are you leading people towards, right? We're leading them towards something that's stable, something that gives them grounding. That's what the heart longs for. We want to have a sense of being grounded in a stable community. And nothing screams like we're stable like 2000 years of church's history of like this is what we've been doing forever and ever. That's really awesome to belong to. I think if you probably look at a lot of conversion stories, you'll find that people felt like when they got to like, wow, this thing has been here for 2000 years, they finally felt like they were standing on rock and like this isn't going anywhere. And so that made the extraordinary encounters are meant to lead to the institutional life. And in particular, people, of course, are drawn to mass, right? And to the beauty of the mass. And maybe just to connect with what we were speaking of earlier, yes, so the mass is this very objectively beautiful event, but we're still dealing with the reality that people find it hard to connect to the mass. And so maybe just kind of bringing a couple of things together here. The church has as its pinnacle the Eucharist and the sacramental life, but that isn't the fullness of what the church does, right? We also have youth group. We also have donuts after mass. We have schools. We have outreach programs, and you can go down the list of what a church provides. But in those environments outside of the church proper, where mass is happening, that's where human relationships within the church develop, and that's very essential. You could consider two scenarios, right? Imagine sitting in a church with a bunch of people you've never done anything with, and then it comes time for silence after communion. Okay, now you're sitting in a church silent with a bunch of people you don't know. That's the worst human experience for a lot of people, is sitting in silence with somebody you don't know. It's like this. It's like, it's the elevator experience, right? Of like, gosh, I just hope I get to my floor soon because this is terrible. Versus the profound experience I think we've all had here, at least, of I'm sitting in silence with somebody that I really enjoy, is such a holy, beautiful thing. It's such a prayerful place to be. It is so fulfilling. So the reality of all the things that we do outside of mass are meant to foster that, so that when I am in mass, I feel the presence of the person next to me whom I love. And there's no awkwardness there. And I think we could promise anybody, if you are at mass and you don't feel awkward about the people you're around, you will find the objective beauty of mass. If you experience community with the people you're next to, there's nothing awkward in mass. You will not be looking for a rock band at mass. You will not be looking for flashy lights. The objective beauty of mass itself will radiate. But that's why it's called Holy Communion. You have to have communion with the Lord, but you also have to have communion with your brother and sister who are there, and you have to experience that, right? And so that goes back to how do you experience identity with them, because identity is key to having a real positive lived experience of community.
It's so true what you're saying, Paul. It reminds me of, we speak about like the vertical dimension of our faith and the horizontal dimension. The vertical being our relationship with God, each of us individually, and the horizontal being our relationship with one another. And it's almost as if the Lord has just designed us in such a way that we're meant for this communion with the church, that you can only progress so far in your vertical, your relationship with God, without also pursuing a relationship with others. One is kind of the limit to the other, or you can't experience so much of one without the other. Like we were talking about at the beginning of this conversation, those like other forms of communion and group identity that people seek. And we spoke about how there's like a limit to the depth and the really lasting meaning of that. It's like you're pursuing horizontal relationship, communion, and that experience without maybe a sufficiently deep vertical dimension. Like the thing that we're all being drawn toward is just not that deep. It's just not that important. But maybe us in the church, maybe we have really tried to just insist on the vertical thing and like, again, the objective nature of what's happening of like, yeah, but this is God, this is Jesus, is really present. Sacraments are, true, they're powerful, and just not respected, I think, again, like how much community should be an on-ramp to a more deep encounter with the God who is truly present in the sacraments and in the church.
And maybe we could offer by way of analogy, if you're going to use the vertical and horizontal dimensions, imagine go back to the NFL game, right? Imagine having a game where winning is not the object. It's like, hey, let's get 60,000 people together and we're all going to cheer really loud, but there's not going to be any winning or losing. We ought to be like, that's the worst idea I've ever had. That sounds really lame,
Yeah.
And then you could have the opposite. You could have, okay, everybody, this is just about winning, and like, don't cheer. We need focus here, and this is just about winning. Like, obviously, either way, an imbalance in either direction is going to lead to something very sterile and very unexciting and uninviting. So I love the fact that you bring that up, because you're right. We can talk about the objectivity of, this is the God Almighty is here present with us in the Holy Eucharist. But if I don't have a lived experience of being in communion with my brother and sister next to me, and both those elements aren't there, yeah, it can quickly become meaningless and uninviting.
Yeah, I think too on that note that oftentimes it's seeing how other people are impacted by God and witnessing like how God has changed their life and how they worship God, like how they engage with the Lord at the Mass or in prayer, that it evokes faith in me. So that's just the whole role of testimony is I can see how God works in someone else's life, and it gives me faith to believe that God can also work in my life in that way. We talk a lot on this podcast about the power of testimony, and we're oftentimes speaking more explicitly about somebody sharing that testimony and sharing their story in whatever way. But I think it also happens just in a silent way where we observe, like we notice. If I'm a young man, I haven't been in confession in a while, and I see a masculine, respectable guy or multiple of them go to confession before Mass, it's like, like I should do that. Like I should go back to confession. Just a witness of other people's faith. You can be wholeheartedly pursuing the Lord, and that's great and that's necessary in your own individual prayer life. But we're so spurred on by the example of other people. It encourages us. It excites us. We get that from the saints, obviously, in their stories, but we need it right here, right now as well.
Yeah, I do think there should be ways that we should be intentional, whether it's a priest or a layperson. Like, what are ways that we can make the Mass a better experience for people, really engaging people, having good music, participating well, of course, for the priest to prayerfully celebrate the Mass, to have good inspired preaching. But apart from that, there really is so much more to being Catholic than the Mass. And Chris, I know a point that you bring up a lot is that we're desiring other things as Catholics sometimes, and not feel like we're getting fed as Catholics, and we can try to put everything that we're missing in the Mass. And the reality is it shouldn't be just the Mass. The Mass was never meant to be, or even just going to church on Sunday if you're another type of Christian, just going to church on Sunday wasn't meant to be just the fullness of the Christian life. And it's like, well, you go to church and then you basically, throughout the week, you don't sin and you're a nice person and maybe you pray when you wake up or something. Because there's so much more to it than that. And as I've mentioned earlier, just with the Acts of the Apostles, and of course Jesus, there was this accompaniment, there was this friendship, there was this community, there was just living life together. And something that's inspired me as a priest in particular is, I think, like some really amazing parishioners that I have at one of my parishes. Something really powerful about this group of Hispanics is that they actually have a lot more intentional community, which is something beautiful about the Latino community in general, but particularly this group of Hispanics, they have communities, comunidades, and so they actually have like basically small groups at their houses, faith-sharing groups at their houses. There's multiple groups of them, and so they meet every week to, I don't know everything they do, but it's faith-sharing. They have a little lesson and live life together. And then a different day of the week, there's a time of like praise. There's a time of praying together. Sometimes they might like go through a book together, and that's like everyone is gathering together. It's not just one small group, but all the small groups get together each week to be part of this bigger community. And so there's these layers of community, and they're just really engaged people. Like they're very generous, they're very dedicated, and I find that really inspiring. So just in terms of what is meant to be the normal Christian life, it's not just going to church on Sundays, even with a really amazing experience of church on Sunday. It's so much more than that. And so I do think it's important that we have the vertical, we're connected to God. We have a worship that's very, I don't know, like transcendent, a transcendent experience of God. But then what's the horizontal level? As believers, being part of the same faith really does provide a great foundation for being connected to each other. As I was saying earlier, yeah, a concert, a sports game really isn't that profound of, doesn't provide that profound of material for connection and unity, but like, hey, like, who are you? Like, who is this God of the universe? What's this relationship we have with him? What is the most profound truths of human existence? What are we're on a journey together, and teams, they're doing something together. There's a common goal, and like, we're trying to help each other be saints. It's not just a matter of like, let's not go to hell, but we're trying to be saints. We're trying to live the life of heaven now on earth. Like, this is profound material for connection with each other. And so I don't know if you want to comment on anything I said or anything come to mind for you, Chris, but I think something we could eventually end with would just be maybe any practical recommendations, ways that anyone's listening to this and they're like, I'm bought in. I think we need to have more of this communal identity. We need more of this system of evangelization. If we're bringing people to Christ, we need a system to bring someone into. We need a system that can continually nourish people in their faith and also help with evangelization.
Yeah, you mentioned system. I think some people might be a little turned off by that word, but obviously what you're talking about when you say system is a system of people, a system of relationships. So I know for myself, sometimes there have been times where I encountered somebody, I had like a powerful conversation with somebody came to me as a priest to meet with me to discuss like their interest in the faith, their interest in the church. And sometimes I don't have like a super concrete sense of like who to hand this person off to. And I don't say that in the sense of like, oh, I just want to like be done with them, or I don't want to have to deal with it. But just in the practical sense of like you mentioned earlier, I can't be everybody's friend. Like I can't, like a more profound sense, I can't be their whole community. Like they can't depend upon me as an individual for this social component. So I think in terms of, like they mentioned, the practical things, we always try to give people practical takeaways. I know this is something I feel convicted about for myself that I need to grow in. So I think maybe I would invite other people to it as well, is that I think a lot of us have a pretty full schedule, and oftentimes it's filled with, yes, maybe Sunday and maybe a couple other things in the week that are devoted to God, that are like where we go to church, where we go to mass, whatever. And then we have a lot of human social things that maybe are not bad, they're not evil or anything, but they're just not really based at all on the faith. And maybe even they're with people who don't really share our faith or anything like that. So to be very practical, I think oftentimes we need to actually to divest of the time that we are spending on other things to even make room for a more faith-based kind of social living, of friendship. So this isn't in any way a call to like abandon all your friends or to clear out your whole calendar or something like that. That would be silly and very burdensome. But just to acknowledge, like, I know oftentimes whenever you give an invitation, whether it's an homily or a message like this, it can just feel like, oh, so there's just another thing I need to do. More, always doing more. So it's not just about adding more things to your schedule, which might already be jam-packed, but I think maybe it's a matter of discerning what are things that I am currently investing a lot of time in, and just to be honest and to reflect, to maybe to pray about what has been the fruit of those activities. It doesn't have to be something sinful, again, doesn't have to be something bad, but we only have so much time. We have very limited time. Time is a very precious resource. So maybe just to be honest about some of those places, and maybe there needs to be a reprioritization. Because there'll be even times for myself where I filled my day up with things, and then I get an invitation from somebody to just be with them and to like spend time with them, and it's something I really want to do. But and when I look at my next week or my next couple of weeks, and I look at their schedule, my schedule, and it's like, I just can't really make that happen right now, and it keeps getting put off. And even something that I want to do, and I know it would be valuable, I just not free to say yes to it because I've made myself so busy. So I know, Michael, you've mentioned in the past on the show the the book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. And it's been had such a big impact on both of us and many of our friends. So hurry and busyness can really displace a lot of other beautiful opportunities. It doesn't mean that we're not going to have a pretty full schedule. We shouldn't be just like idle. I'm just not just don't need to be sitting around waiting for someone to call and invite me over, but just to give a little bit of room so there can be a sense of like, I can be interrupted. I'm not just every week is jam packed. Some of that doesn't depend on us, but in the long run, how we build our life and how we build our schedule does depend a lot on us and our own decisions. So if we are convinced in principle and theory about what our faith tells us about the need for Christian community and for parish community, we're going to have to make room for that. And it's not going to instantly happen either when we make that room. It's not going to instantly be filled by all these meaningful things. We have to give it some time as well and be patient because it's worth it.
Yeah, I think on one level, we don't have to eliminate absolutely everything. But when it comes to these examples you were talking about earlier, it was like sports and especially the gangs, there's a real investment. And so I don't want to be overly dramatic and say we have to drop absolutely everything. But at the same time, I think you'd agree with this, Chris, but there has to be like a real level of an investment. It's not just like I live my normal, I'm thinking of Americans, like my normal American life. I have church on Sunday and I'm just going to sprinkle a little bit like a Bible study every once in a while. It's so much more than just, it should be a real radical shift. Like the way we look should be different, should be drastically different. I think a lot of this is just really living life together. That's kind of messy, but it's also attractive. I know as a priest now, I'm probably not the perfect example because I'm not a family man, so to speak. But little examples I can give is there have been times where it's like I would maybe have someone over, but my house was kind of messy. It was like a busy week, just kind of, I don't know, the dishes or whatever piled up. And I'm like, well, my house is kind of messy. And then as you got to the point where I just like, well, you know what? I'm just going to invite people. And I don't want to be over dramatic. It wasn't like I'm some hoarder, but I was like, I'm just going to accept the fact that maybe I don't have like the most amazing food to offer someone. It's like, hey, I got to think of a frozen pizza, out there and you can warm up some frozen Brussels sprouts. And I started hosting the parish's Bible study at my last parish, some at my house. And, I would clean up some, but maybe things weren't perfectly in order. And it's just accepting the sort of the mess of it. And also not having everything to be so polished is trying to have everything be so organized and polished can be an obstacle sometimes. I did just even like in little ways where normally if it was like after an evening mass, I wouldn't really have much time before the next thing. But there was a time where it's like, well, I got 30 minutes and a guy I knew was at daily mass. I'm like, yeah, I'll just come over a little bit. I'm going to be eating my dinner. I don't have anything ready for you. And so these are very specific examples, but like, what are just ways that we can live life together? What are ways that we can really build up this friendship? It's not, part of it could be communal events, but I think it's more of this grassroots community that Paul, that you were talking about. That's something attractive. That's something that people want to be part of, where it's not just like this thing, but it's like, hey, we live this amazing friendship and relationship, and we want you to be part of it. I think that's attractive. So, yeah, just finding ways to do more things together, and doesn't just have to be churchy things. But hopefully, as people are going for a walk, they're exercising, hopefully those things will come up. It might not be exclusively about the Bible or something, but yeah, that's kind of what comes to mind for me.
This has been a really awesome conversation. I'm really passionate about this topic of evangelization, but especially looking at the nitty gritty of it and like how it actually plays out in the life of a parish. I know sometimes a lot of our podcast episodes have been on these different themes of prayer and spiritual gifts and things, and it can sound, maybe at times, if you're listening or watching, it might sound like a little bit idealistic at times. So it was so great to have you on, Father Paul, just to talk about some of what this looks like in a parish, because that's where we all spend our days and our weeks in the church. It's good to learn about these other themes and maybe things that we're less familiar with, that maybe aren't part of our day-to-day experience, so that we can realize that that's part of what it means to be a Christian, part of what it means to live the normal Christian life. But then we do always need to bring that back down to earth of translating it into our day-to-day experience. So I think this is a really hopeful message that the faith, yes, it is supernatural, God is beyond us, but that I think it's encouraging just to know that so much of transmitting the faith to others, to our family, to our friends, to people we work with, so much of it happens in these ordinary human interactions. And our joy that we have in the Lord and our relationship with God is going to be magnified the more we can include other people in that in very concrete ways. So I just want to close in prayer, and actually going to open the prayer with just a verse from the first letter of St. John. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. This is 1 John chapter 1, verse 3. That which we have seen and heard, we proclaim also to you, so that you may have fellowship with us. And our fellowship is with the Father and with his Son, Jesus Christ. And we are writing this that our joy may be complete. Holy Spirit, thank you for drawing us into the family of the church. Help us to just receive all the joy and the peace that you have for us, and help us to live that joy in a way that draws other people into the bosom of the church, so that our joy can be complete, and that the joy of God can be complete as all his children come home. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.